My husband's boss made him cry, so I spent 6 months building the perfect case to destroy their entire management team. The board of directors called it the most comprehensive workplace abuse documentation they'd ever seen. I've never considered myself a vengeful person. Patient? Yes. Strategic? Absolutely. But revenge wasn't really my style until 6 months ago when my husband came home with tears streaming down his face. Let me back up. My husband, Mark, is the most talented software architect I've ever met. He's brilliant but humble. The kind of guy who solves complex problems while giving others credit. He's been at Horizon Tech for 3 years, and for the first 2, he seemed happy. The company was growing, his ideas were being implemented, and he felt valued. Then everything changed when they brought in a new COO, Richard Keller. I first noticed the shift when Mark started coming home later and later, just finishing up some projects, say, his eyes glued to his laptop even during dinner. Then the weekend work started, the canceled plans, the constant emails at all hours. They're just going through a transition period, explained, dark circles forming under his eyes. Once we launch the new platform, things will calm down, but they didn't calm down. Instead, Mark started mentioning offhand comments from his direct boss, Diane, who suddenly seemed to find fault with everything he did. Work previously been praised for was now barely adequate. Ideas he presented were dismissed in meetings, only to resurface weeks later as Diane's or Richard's innovative solutions. I suggested he start documenting everything: the unpaid overtime, the stolen ideas, the shifting expectations. But Mark just shrugged. That's corporate America, he said with a defeated smile. Besides, they promised me that promotion after the Westfield project launches. I bit my tongue. As a former HR professional with 15 years of experience, including 3 at a Fortune 500 company, I knew exactly what was happening. Classic management abuse tactics, moving goalposts, gaslighting, stealing credit, and dangling promotions like carrots that never materialize. But Mark needed to see it for himself. Then came that Tuesday in April. Mark had been leading the Westfield project for months, countless late nights, skipped weekends, meticulous planning. The client meeting was scheduled for p.m. By p.m., I was expecting a call about celebratory dinner plans. Instead, at 7:30, I heard his key in the door. When he walked in, his face was ashen. He set his laptop bag down carefully, like it might shatter, and just stood there in our entryway. Mark. I approached slowly. What happened? His eyes met mine, and that's when I saw it. The tears. In 15 years together, I'd seen Mark cry exactly 3 times. When his father died, when we lost our first pregnancy, and on our wedding day. His voice cracked. They pulled me from the presentation 5 minutes before it started. Richard told the client I wasn't senior enough to lead the discussion. He took a shuddering breath. Then Diane presented my entire strategy as her own. When the client asked a technical question she couldn't answer, she called me in not to answer it myself, but to assist her with the explanation. He sank onto the couch, staring at his hands. After the meeting, Richard berated me in the hallway right in front of the client team as they were leaving. Said I undermined Diane by using technical jargon and made her look unprepared. A bitter laugh escaped him. Then he told me the promotion discussion is on hold until I demonstrate more team player qualities. Something inside me snapped. I'd watched this company slowly crush my husband's spirit for months. I'd listened, sympathized, suggested documentation. I'd played by the rules, just like Mark did. And where had it gotten us? That's it, I said quietly. Mark looked up, wiping his eyes. What? I'm done watching them do this to you. I sat beside him, taking his hands in mine. This isn't normal workplace stress, Mark. It's abuse, it's wage theft. It's probably illegal in several ways. He sighed. What am I supposed to do? Quit? In this economy? With the mortgage and your mom's medical bills? I squeezed his hands. No. You're not going to do anything. His brow furrowed. Then what? I am. The next morning, after Mark left for work, yes, he still went in. My husband's work ethic is both his greatest strength and his greatest vulnerability. I opened my laptop and created a new folder titled Project Horizon. Inside, I made subfolders: wage theft, harassment, credit theft, promotion denial documentation, witness statements, and legal research. Then I got to work. First, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I spent that day researching Horizon Tech, their corporate structure, board members, investors, clients, and public reputation. I discovered they'd recently secured a significant round of funding based largely on the success of projects Mark had architected. Their website prominently featured the Westfield project as an upcoming flagship launch. Interesting. Next, I created a timeline of Mark's employment, noting when problems began, key incidents, and patterns of behavior. I reviewed his employment contract, offer letter, and all written communications about his promised promotion. I also needed to know if Mark was alone in this treatment or part of a pattern. Through LinkedIn, I identified former Horizon employees who had left in the past year. Using my HR background and network, I carefully reached out to a few, framing it as research for potential employment opportunities. The responses were illuminating. Run far away from Horizon, and especially Richard Keller, wrote one former project manager. Toxic environment that rewards sycophants and punishes actual talent. Another ex-employee was more direct. Diane Mercer took credit for my entire UX redesign, then had me put on a PIP when I brought it up to HR. They're untouchable because they bring in the big clients. Over the next few weeks, I built my case methodically. Mark had no idea. I told him I was freelancing on some HR consulting projects, not entirely untrue, as I did pick up a small contract to maintain appearances. In reality, I was working on the most important project of my career, saving my husband and taking down the people who had broken him. The evidence gathering was challenging. I needed proof, not just stories, so I got creative. Hey, can I use your laptop tonight? I asked Mark one evening. Mine's updating and I need to finish this consulting report. While he showered, I quickly downloaded copies of relevant emails and project documents that showed his contributions versus what was presented to clients. I found meeting invites that proved he was originally slated to lead presentations, followed by last-minute changes. I discovered email chains where his ideas were dismissed, only to be repurposed later under someone else's name. I also found something unexpected, a folder of performance reviews from before Richard and Diane's time, glowing evaluations, merit increases, specific praise for the very qualities they now criticize. The wage theft documentation was easier. Mark had meticulously tracked his hours in his personal calendar. I compared these to his official timesheets and pay stubs. The discrepancy was staggering, over 600 unpaid hours in the past year alone. But I needed more: external validation, witness testimony, irrefutable evidence. So I took a calculated risk. You should invite some of your team over for dinner, I suggested casually. You're always talking about how Alex and Priya are dealing with the same deadline stress. Maybe it would help to commiserate outside the office. Mark seemed surprised but agreed it might be nice. The following Friday, I served lasagna and plenty of wine to Mark's colleagues. After dinner, when Mark went to the kitchen for dessert, I made my move. So, how are things really going at Horizon? I asked quietly. Mark doesn't tell me much, but he seems stressed. The floodgates opened. Alex and Priya exchanged glances before Priya said, "It's bad, really bad. What they're doing to the development team, especially Mark, it's just wrong. They're working us to death while taking all the credit," Alex added, checking to make sure Mark wasn't returning yet. And the way Richard spoke to Mark after the Westfield presentation, we were all shocked. Nobody deserved that, especially not Mark, who built the entire solution. I nodded sympathetically. That sounds awful. Has anyone documented these issues? Spoken to HR? They laughed bitterly. HR reports directly to Richard, Priya explained. The last person who complained was gone within a month. By the end of the evening, I had 2 more allies and promises of documentation from their perspective. Over the following weeks, they discreetly provided me with internal emails, meeting notes, and even recordings of 2 meetings where Richard and Diane explicitly took credit for Mark's work. Georgia is a one-party consent state for recordings, a fact I had researched thoroughly 3 months into my evidence gathering. I had a substantial case file but still needed a smoking gun, something undeniable that tied everything together. It came from an unexpected source. Emily, Mark's former manager, James, sounded surprised to receive my call. H left Horizon 6 months before Richard arrived and now worked at a competing firm. What can I do for you? I took a deep breath. I need your help. It's about Mark and what's happening at Horizon. There was a long pause. I've been hearing things, he finally said. None of it good? I explained my project in vague terms, emphasizing my concern for Mark's well-being rather than my plans for retribution. James sighed heavily. I left because I saw what was coming. Richard has a history. This isn't his first company. He did the same thing at Vertex Solutions. Came in, identified the top talent, marginalized them while extracting their best work, then pushed them out once H secured their intellectual property and client relationships. My heart raced. Do you have any documentation from that time? Anything that shows a pattern? Better, James replied. I have the wrongful termination and intellectual property theft lawsuit filed by 2 former Vertex employees. It was settled out of court with NDAs, but I was deposed as a witness before that happened. The documents were never sealed. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived containing copies of the Vertex case files. The similarities were striking, almost a playbook. Richard had done this before, and apparently learned to cover his tracks better at Horizon, but not well enough. By month 4, I had 600 plus documented unpaid overtime hours, 37 instances of credit theft with clear paper trails, 14 examples of shifting performance standards, 8 written promises of promotion with subsequent denial documentation, 5 witness statements from current employees, 3 detailed accounts from former employees, the previous lawsuit showing a pattern of behavior, recordings of 4 meetings showing clear harassment and credit theft, financial analysis showing how Richard and Diane's bonuses correlated with projects Mark had actually led. I organized everything into a comprehensive report with executive summary, detailed findings, supporting evidence, and relevant legal statutes potentially violated. My HR background proved invaluable. I knew exactly how to present this to make it impossible to ignore. But I still hadn't decided exactly how to deploy this nuclear option. Then, fate intervened. Horizon's hosting a major client event next month. Mark mentioned during dinner. All the board members will be there, plus our biggest investors. Richard's presenting our innovation roadmap, basically everything my team has built that he's taking credit for. I kept my expression neutral while my mind raced. That sounds significant. Yeah, Mark sighed, and guess who's not invited despite developing most of the technology being showcased? At least Priya and Alex get to attend since they're presenting a technical demo. That night, I finalized my plan. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The next few weeks were a flurry of preparation. I refined my documentation, consulted discreetly with an employment attorney friend to ensure my approach was legally sound, and coordinated with Alex and Priya, who had become willing accomplices once they understood my intentions. Are you sure about this? Priya asked during our final planning session at a coffee shop far from Horizon's offices. There's no going back. I've never been more sure of anything, I replied, checking that my final packages were properly prepared. They broke the rules, not us. They broke my husband. The day before the event, I could barely contain my anticipation. Mark noticed my distraction. Everything okay? You seem tense, he said as we got ready for bed. I smiled and kissed his cheek. Just a big day tomorrow with my consulting client. Nothing to worry about. You've been working so hard lately, he said, pulling me close. I'm grateful. You know, with everything at work being so difficult, having you to come home to, it's what keeps me going. For a moment, I almost told him everything, but no, he needed plausible deniability. This was my battle to fight. It's all going to work out, I promised. Get some sleep. The morning of the client event arrived with perfect, dramatic weather thunderstorms that matched my mood. I dressed carefully in my most professional outfit, a charcoal pantsuit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back, the kind of outfit that says take me seriously or regret it. Mark had left early to help set up the technical demonstrations. I waited until I knew the event would be well underway before making my move. At precisely 10:30 a.m., I sent identical emails to all 7 Horizon board members, the 3 major investors, the company's legal counsel, and the Department of Labor. Each contained my full report with a personalized cover letter explaining my findings and their specific relevance to the recipient. To the board, as fiduciaries responsible for company governance, you should be aware of systematic abuses occurring under your watch. To the investors, your recent 40 meters investment was secured based on innovations and client relationships that are at risk due to the management practices detailed herein. To legal counsel, the attached documentation outlines potential legal liabilities the company currently faces, including wage theft, harassment, and intellectual property misappropriation. To the Department of Labor, I'm reporting systematic wage theft and labor violations at Horizon Technology. I had timed the emails to arrive during Richard's keynote presentation about Horizon's culture of innovation, a presentation I knew would heavily feature my husband's stolen work. Then I drove to the venue. The Westfield Hotel's conference center was elegant, with Horizon banners and signs directing attendees to the main ballroom. I slipped in quietly through a side door, nodding to Alex, who was positioned near the entrance as planned. He gave me a subtle thumbs up. The emails had landed. I took a seat in the back just as Richard was reaching his conclusion, gesturing grandly at slides showcasing projects Mark had architected. And this innovative approach to client solutions represents the future of Horizon Technology, he was saying, his voice confident and completely unaware of what was about to happen. I watched as several board members in the front row glanced at their phones almost simultaneously. The board chair, Patricia Winters, frowned deeply and leaned over to whisper to the man beside her. 3 rows ahead of me, a woman I recognized as their lead investor, Anita Desai, was scrolling intently through what I knew was my report, her expression darkening with each swipe. Richard concluded to polite applause, completely oblivious to the storm brewing. And now, I'd like to invite our client success team to demonstrate the Westfield solution that's already revolutionizing inventory management. As the lights came up for the transition, I saw Patricia motion urgently to the company's general counsel. Phones were out all across the room now, with hurried text messages and whispered conversations creating a low buzz of distraction. Mark was at the side of the stage, helping set up the technical demonstration. He hadn't seen me yet. I watched his face focus, professional, despite everything they'd put him through. My heart swelled with both pride and protective fury. The next 30 minutes unfolded exactly as I had anticipated. The technical demonstration proceeded, but the attention of key stakeholders was clearly elsewhere. Patricia and 3 other board members had stepped out into the hallway with the general counsel. Anita Desai was making rapid notes on her tablet, her face grim. When the presentations concluded and the networking portion began, I watched Richard work the room, still blissfully unaware that his world was collapsing around him. Diane was nearby, laughing too loudly at something a client said. I stayed in my corner, observing. Mark spotted me and made his way over, confusion evident. Emily, what are you doing here? Before I could answer, Patricia Winters approached us, her expression severe but controlled. Mr. Sanders? Mark Sanders? She asked, looking at my husband. Mark straightened immediately. Yes, Ms. Winters, it's good to see you again. Would you please join me and several board members in the Oakwood room immediately? Her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. She glanced at me. And you must be Mrs. Sanders. I believe we should have you join us as well. Mark looked completely bewildered. What's this about? Patricia's expression softened slightly. I think you know, she said, looking at me to Mark. She added, we've received some concerning information about your treatment at Horizon that requires immediate attention. As we followed her through the ballroom, I saw Richard being approached by the general counsel, his face transitioning from confidence to confusion. Diane was being escorted toward the same meeting room by another board member. Mark gripped my hand. Emily, what's happening? He whispered urgently. I squeezed back reassuringly. Justice? The next 2 hours were a blur of revelations, accusations, and stunned silences. In the Oakwood room, my entire report was displayed on a large screen, with board members and investors taking turns asking pointed questions. Richard and Diane started with denial, then moved to deflection, and finally settled on damage control as the evidence mounted against them. Their faces when the Vertex lawsuit was presented were particularly satisfying. Richard turned an alarming shade of gray, while Diane's expression revealed she hadn't known about his previous pattern. Mark sat in shocked silence through most of it, occasionally confirming details or answering direct questions. When they played one of the recordings where Richard berated him after stealing his presentation, his hands clenched into fists, and I gently placed mine over them. Why didn't you tell me? He whispered as Anita Desai grilled Richard about discrepancies between reported development timelines and actual work. You needed to focus on surviving. I whispered back, I needed to focus on this. Patricia Winters controlled the meeting with impressive authority, never allowing Richard's attempts at justification to derail the proceedings. By the end, the outcome was clear to everyone in the room. Mr. Keller, Ms. Mercer, please surrender your company devices and credentials to security, Patricia announced. Your employment with Horizon Technology is terminated, effective immediately. Legal will contact you regarding the terms of separation and potential further action. Richard's face contorted with rage. You can't do this. I built this company's client relationships. You built nothing. Anita Desai interrupted coldly. You exploited the people who did the actual building. The evidence is overwhelming and frankly, disgusting. She turned to Mark. Mr. Sanders, on behalf of the investment team, I want to personally apologize. This is not how we expect companies in our portfolio to operate. As Richard and Diane were escorted out, Patricia turned to Mark. Mr. Sanders, I'd like to speak with you privately about your role going forward. We have some significant restructuring to do, and based on what we've seen today, you're exactly the kind of leader this company actually needs. Mark looked stunned. I need some time to think, of course, Patricia nodded. Take the rest of the week. But please know that the board is committed to making this right, including full back pay for documented overtime, appropriate compensation adjustments, and proper attribution for your contributions. As the room cleared, Mark and I remained seated, processing everything that had just happened. When we were finally alone, he turned to me, his expression a complex mix of emotions. 6 months, he said quietly. You've been working on this for 6 months without telling me. I nodded. I couldn't watch them destroy you any longer. And I knew you wouldn't let me do this if I told you, because it could have backfired spectacularly. He exclaimed. You could have made everything worse. I could have lost my job. We could have been sued, but we weren't, I said calmly, because I made sure the evidence was irrefutable. Because I know how these systems work, because I wasn't going to let them win. He stared at me for a long moment, then suddenly pulled me into a tight embrace. You're terrifying, he whispered against my hair, and I've never loved you more. The aftermath unfolded over the following weeks like a corporate drama series. Richard and Diane were gone, along with 2 HR managers who had enabled their behavior. The board appointed an interim management team while they conducted a proper search, with Mark leading the technical organization as the newly created Chief Technology Officer. His first official act was to ensure Alex, Priya, and the rest of his team received proper credit and compensation for their contributions. His second was to implement transparent promotion criteria and workload expectations. The company paid out over $2 million in back wages to various employees affected by the previous management's wage theft practices. They also established an ethics hotline reporting directly to the board. Mark thrived in his new role, coming home energized rather than depleted. He still worked hard, that's who he is, but now his efforts were recognized, compensated, and sustainable. 3 months after what Horizon employees now referred to as the reckoning, Mark and I were enjoying a rare vacation on the California coast when he received an email from Patricia Winters. They've completed the executive search, he said, showing me his phone. They're offering me the permanent CTO position. I smiled. Are you going to take it? He looked out at the ocean, considering, the company's different now, better, and I built so much of the technology it would be satisfying to guide its future. He turned to me. What do you think? I think you should do whatever makes you happy, I said honestly. You've earned that right. He nodded slowly. I'm going to accept, but with conditions, proper work-life balance policies for the entire company. Not just me. I leaned against his shoulder, watching the waves. That's my husband, always thinking of others. I learned from the best, he said, kissing the top of my head. My terrifying, brilliant, patient avenger. We sat in comfortable silence for a while before he spoke again. You know, I've been thinking about what you did, how you approached it. You could have just confronted Richard directly, or gone to HR, or had me quit. The normal, emotional responses. Those wouldn't have worked, I replied. The system was rigged against individual complaints. It needed to be dismantled systematically. Exactly. He nodded. You didn't just get revenge, you fixed the underlying problem. Not just for me, but for everyone there. He squeezed my hand. That's the difference between reacting and responding, between an outburst and a revolution. I smiled, watching the sunset paint the sky in triumphant colors. Some people deserve a carefully documented, meticulously executed reckoning. Remind me never to get on your bad side. He laughed. Just keep bringing home flowers occasionally and you'll be fine. I teased, snuggling closer. That night, as Mark slept peacefully beside me for the first time in over a year, I reflected on our journey. My revenge hadn't been about destroying Richard and Diane, though that was a satisfying bonus. It had been about restoring justice, rebalancing power, and rebuilding what they had broken both in the company and in my husband. Sometimes love isn't just about comfort and support. Sometimes it's about fighting battles your partner can't fight themselves. Sometimes it's about being patient, gathering evidence, and striking at exactly the right moment. And sometimes, just sometimes, justice tastes sweeter than any other victory possibly could.